Black boy to paralyzed billionaire. I'll heal you for leftovers, she laughs. Then everything changes. In the shadow of America's largest pharmaceutical empire, where billion-dollar treatments kept patients dependent rather than healed, Dr. Catherine Whitmore ruled from her wheelchair with the cold efficiency of someone who had turned suffering into profit. When 12-year-old Jamal Thompson offered to heal her paralysis in exchange for her leftover food, her laughter was sharp with disbelief. How could a homeless child succeed where Harvard-trained specialists had failed? But sometimes the most powerful medicine comes from the most unexpected sources, and sometimes the wisdom our society discards is exactly what we need to be whole again. Dr. Catherine Whitmore commanded her penthouse office from behind a mahogany desk that cost more than most people's homes, her paralyzed legs hidden beneath designer blankets, while her sharp mind continued to orchestrate one of America's largest pharmaceutical empires. The accident that had claimed her mobility 3 years earlier had done nothing to diminish her reputation as the most ruthless CEO in the medical industry. Someone who viewed human suffering as market opportunity and patent protection as sacred doctrine. Her floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city where her company's medications kept millions alive, while simultaneously keeping them financially dependent on treatments they could never afford to complete. The irony of her own condition: billions of dollars at her disposal, but no cure for the spinal damage that had confined her to a wheelchair, was a source of bitter amusement that had hardened her heart against any form of compassion or alternative thinking. 15 stories below, 12-year-old Jamal Thompson navigated the lunch crowd outside Whitmore Pharmaceuticals with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to survive on society's discarded abundance. His backpack, worn thin from 3 years of constant use, contained textbooks he'd rescued from dumpsters and notebooks filled with observations about plants and healing that most adults would dismiss as childhood fantasy. Jamal had been living on the streets since his grandmother died, bouncing between shelters and foster homes that had no patience for a boy whose interests lay in herbs and natural remedies rather than the conventional path toward minimum wage employment that most people expected from children of his background and circumstances. The lunch rush from Whitmore's cafeteria provided Jamal with his most reliable source of nutrition, as employees discarded half-eaten meals and untouched sides that represented more food security than he'd known since his grandmother's death. But today felt different as he sorted through the refuse behind the building, his keen eyes noting unusual patterns in what people were throwing away. Expensive supplements, half-empty bottles of prescription medications, and medical journals filled with research about conditions that his grandmother had treated with plants from their tiny garden. The waste was staggering not just in quantity, but in quality, representing medical knowledge and resources that could help thousands of people if they weren't locked behind patents and profit margins that made healing a luxury rather than a human right. Dr. Whitmore's private elevator descended to the parking garage at precisely 1:15 p.m., just as it had every day since her accident. But today her routine would intersect with forces she'd spent her entire career dismissing as unscientific superstition. As her chauffeur loaded her wheelchair into the custom-modified Bentley, neither she nor Jamal could have anticipated that their worlds were about to collide in ways that would challenge everything both of them believed about medicine, healing, and the true source of power in a world where suffering had become the foundation of immense wealth. The boy who survived on leftovers was about to offer something to the woman who owned everything, and her response would determine whether both their lives would be transformed or whether the cycle of dismissal and missed opportunity would continue unchanged. Jamal's opportunity came when Dr. Whitmore's wheelchair became stuck on a broken piece of pavement outside the building's service entrance, her chauffeur momentarily distracted by a phone call that couldn't wait even for his employer's immediate needs. The boy emerged from behind the dumpster with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to help others without expecting recognition or reward, his small hands working quickly to clear the debris that had trapped her expensive medical equipment. Dr. Whitmore's first instinct was irritation at being seen in a vulnerable position by someone she viewed as street refuse. But something in Jamal's respectful efficiency made her pause before calling security to remove him from her sight. "Thank you," she said grudgingly, her voice carrying the kind of distant politeness that wealthy people used with service workers they preferred to keep invisible. But Jamal didn't retreat as expected, instead studying her wheelchair and then her face with the intense focus of someone processing complex information at speeds that defied his apparent circumstances. "Ma'am," he said carefully, his voice carrying the formal tone he'd learned was necessary when addressing people who held power over his survival. "I couldn't help but notice that you have trouble with muscle spasms in your legs. My grandmother used to treat people with similar conditions using herbs that most doctors don't know about anymore." Dr. Whitmore's laugh was sharp and bitter, the sound of someone who had heard every possible cure, treatment, and miracle remedy during 3 years of searching for solutions that her own industry couldn't provide. "Young man," she replied with the patronizing tone reserved for children who didn't understand the complexity of adult problems, "I have consulted with the world's leading neurologists, spent millions on experimental treatments, and employed research teams that have access to medical knowledge beyond anything you could imagine. What makes you think that a homeless child could possibly know something that escaped the attention of Harvard-trained physicians?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge, highlighting the vast chasm that separated her world of medical degrees and research laboratories from his reality of survival and street wisdom. But Jamal's response surprised her with its lack of defensiveness or wounded pride. "Because," he said simply, "my grandmother healed 3 people in our neighborhood who doctors said would never walk again, and she taught me which plants can help repair nerve damage when they're prepared correctly. I know you probably think I'm just a stupid kid, but I also know that traditional medicine worked for thousands of years before pharmaceutical companies decided that only expensive treatments could be real medicine." Dr. Whitmore found herself studying the boy's face more carefully, noting the intelligence in his eyes and the careful way he spoke about medical concepts that most adults couldn't articulate clearly. His offer was absurd on its face, a street child claiming he could heal conditions that had stumped the medical establishment, but something in his quiet confidence made her pause before dismissing him entirely. "And what exactly would you want in return for this miraculous cure?" she asked, her tone skeptical but no longer openly mocking. Jamal's answer would either confirm her assumptions about his motives or force her to reconsider everything she thought she knew about healing, wisdom, and the sources from which both could emerge. "The humble request, just your leftovers, ma'am," Jamal replied without hesitation, his words carrying such simple sincerity that Dr. Whitmore had to process them twice before understanding their meaning. "I mean, if you don't finish your lunch or dinner, maybe you could let me have what you don't eat instead of throwing it away. I've been watching the dumpster behind your building for months, and there's so much good food that gets wasted while people like me go hungry. I'm not asking for money or anything fancy, just food that you were going to throw away anyway." The request was so modest compared to the magnitude of what he was offering that it highlighted the absurd inequality between their circumstances while somehow making his proposal seem more credible rather than less. Dr. Whitmore stared at the boy in shocked silence, her pharmaceutical empire built on treatments that cost thousands of dollars per dose, while this child was offering to attempt healing her condition in exchange for table scraps. The contrast was so stark it felt like commentary on everything wrong with the system she had helped create and profit from. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that you believe you can help me walk again, and all you want in return is my leftover food?" The disbelief in her voice wasn't mockery now, but genuine confusion at encountering someone whose value system operated according to principles her world had abandoned long ago. Jamal nodded earnestly, his expression showing none of the calculation or hidden agenda she had learned to expect from everyone who approached her with medical claims. "My grandmother always said that healing was supposed to be a gift, not a business. She never charged people money because she said sickness wasn't their fault, so why should they have to pay to get better? I know it sounds crazy to someone like you, but I really do know which plants can help with nerve regeneration, and I've been studying your condition by watching how you move. I think there's a combination of herbs that might help, but it would take time, and you'd have to trust me even though I don't have any diplomas or certificates." The conversation was surreal in ways that transcended their different backgrounds and circumstances, forcing Dr. Whitmore to confront the possibility that everything she believed about medicine, value, and expertise might be fundamentally flawed. Here was a child offering her something that billions of dollars hadn't been able to purchase, asking for nothing more than the basic sustenance that her world discarded without thought. The ethical implications were staggering. If Jamal possessed even a fraction of the knowledge he claimed, her company's approach to healthcare represented not just missed opportunities, but active harm caused by prioritizing profit over healing. Her response to his offer would reveal whether she was capable of recognizing wisdom that didn't come wrapped in expensive credentials and academic pedigree. Dr. Whitmore's decision to allow Jamal to attempt his treatment came not from belief in his abilities, but from a combination of curiosity and desperation that had been building over 3 years of failed conventional therapies. "Fine," she said, her tone suggesting she was humoring a child's fantasy rather than engaging in serious medical consultation. "But this happens under controlled conditions. You'll work under the supervision of my medical team. Every herb and preparation will be analyzed by our laboratory, and at the first sign that you're causing harm, this experiment ends immediately." The conditions she imposed were designed to protect her from liability while satisfying her scientific training's demand for documentation and oversight. The arrangement that followed was unlike anything in Dr. Whitmore's corporate experience, as she found herself providing Jamal with access to her penthouse kitchen while he foraged for plants in Central Park with the focused intensity of someone following ancient knowledge passed down through generations. Her executive chef was instructed to save all leftovers for the boy, creating a bizarre situation where a billionaire's discarded meals became payment for experimental medical treatment that her own industry would have priced in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Jamal's gratitude for simple food was both humbling and disturbing, highlighting the casual waste that characterized her lifestyle, while children like him struggled for basic nutrition. The herbs Jamal gathered and prepared in her kitchen challenged every assumption her medical team held about therapeutic compounds, as laboratory analysis revealed complex chemical interactions that their pharmaceutical research had never explored. His preparations combined plants in ways that seemed random to trained pharmacologists, but showed sophisticated understanding of how different compounds could enhance each other's healing properties. Dr. Whitmore watched him work with growing fascination, noting how his movements in her kitchen carried the same careful precision she'd seen in world-class research laboratories, despite his complete lack of formal training or expensive equipment. As Jamal began applying his treatments, carefully prepared tinctures and topical applications that he explained would help restore nerve function over time, Dr. Whitmore found herself documenting sensations she hadn't experienced since her accident. The tingling and warmth that followed his applications were subtle but undeniably real, suggesting that his claims might have basis in medical reality that her education had never taught her to recognize. The possibility that a homeless child possessed healing knowledge that had escaped her entire industry was both thrilling and terrifying, threatening to overturn everything she'd built her career and fortune upon while offering hope she'd thought was permanently lost. 3 weeks into Jamal's treatment regimen, Dr. Whitmore experienced her first moment of genuine sensation below her waist since the accident, a tingling in her left foot that sent shockwaves through her medical team and forced them to reconsider every assumption they'd made about spinal cord injuries and recovery potential. The boy's herbal preparations, which had seemed like primitive superstition to her Harvard-trained neurologists, were producing measurable improvements in nerve function that their most advanced treatments had failed to achieve. Laboratory analysis of Jamal's compounds revealed sophisticated biochemical interactions that pharmaceutical companies had overlooked in their focus on synthetic alternatives, suggesting that traditional medicine contained wisdom that modern science had dismissed rather than studied. The progress accelerated as Jamal's confidence grew and Dr. Whitmore's skepticism transformed into cautious hope, then genuine amazement as feeling returned to areas of her body that specialists had declared permanently dead. Her medical team documented improvements that defied their understanding of spinal cord recovery, forcing them to expand their research into traditional healing methods they previously considered unworthy of scientific attention. The irony wasn't lost on Dr. Whitmore that her pharmaceutical empire had spent billions developing treatments while dismissing the very healing traditions that were now restoring her mobility through preparations that cost virtually nothing to produce. By the 6th week, Dr. Whitmore was able to stand with assistance, her legs trembling with weakness but responding to her commands for the first time in 3 years. The moment was captured on video by her medical team, documenting not just her physical recovery, but the transformation in her relationship with Jamal, who had evolved from charity case to respected healer despite his youth and circumstances. The boy who had offered to trade healing for leftovers had delivered something that all her wealth and connections couldn't purchase, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about the medical industry she'd helped create and the communities her company had systematically excluded from healthcare access. The viral video of Dr. Whitmore taking her first steps leaked despite her attempts to control the narrative, spreading across social media platforms with hashtags like #LeftoversForHealing and #StreetWisdom that celebrated Jamal's achievement while raising uncomfortable questions about pharmaceutical pricing and medical accessibility. Comments poured in from people sharing their own experiences with traditional healing methods that had been dismissed by conventional medicine, creating a grassroots movement that challenged the monopoly her industry had established over healthcare solutions. The story that began with a homeless boy's modest request for food had evolved into a global conversation about healing, equity, and the wisdom that society routinely discarded along with other forms of perceived waste. 6 months after their first encounter, Dr. Whitmore stood before a congressional hearing on healthcare accessibility, her ability to walk again serving as living testimony to the healing potential that existed outside the pharmaceutical industry's expensive paradigms. Jamal sat beside her as an expert witness, his transformation from homeless child to recognized healer documented in medical journals that had initially refused to publish findings that challenged conventional treatment protocols. The hearing was addressing legislation that would require pharmaceutical companies to research traditional healing methods before dismissing them, a policy change inspired by the impossible recovery that had captured global attention and sparked demands for medical industry reform. Dr. Whitmore's company had undergone a complete transformation under her new leadership philosophy, shifting from profit-maximizing pharmaceutical manufacturing to collaborative research that incorporated traditional healing wisdom into evidence-based medicine. The change hadn't been voluntary. Public pressure following her recovery had forced her board to choose between embracing reform or facing boycotts that threatened their market position. Jamal had been appointed as Director of Traditional Medicine Research, a position created specifically to honor his contributions while ensuring that future healing discoveries wouldn't be dismissed due to their source's lack of conventional credentials. The partnership between Dr. Whitmore and Jamal had created a new model for medical research that combined scientific rigor with respect for traditional knowledge, producing breakthrough treatments that were both effective and affordable. Their collaboration had spawned similar programs at universities and research institutions worldwide, as the medical establishment was forced to acknowledge that healing wisdom could emerge from communities they'd previously ignored. The leftovers that had once sustained Jamal's body had been transformed into sustenance for a revolution that was reshaping healthcare accessibility and challenging the fundamental assumptions about who possessed medical expertise worthy of respect and study. The boy who had offered healing for table scraps had become a symbol of overlooked potential and dismissed wisdom, inspiring policy changes that required medical institutions to engage with traditional healers and community knowledge holders. Dr. Whitmore's recovery had demonstrated that the most powerful treatments might exist outside expensive research facilities, in the hands of people whose poverty had made them invisible to an industry that confused cost with value and credentials with wisdom. Their story continued to influence medical education, pharmaceutical research, and healthcare policy, proving that sometimes the most revolutionary changes began with the simplest acts of mutual respect and recognition between people whose worlds had never been designed to intersect. Jamal's healing herbs transformed not just Dr. Whitmore's body, but an entire industry's understanding of where true medical wisdom originates. The boy who survived on leftovers taught a billionaire that the most valuable treatments can't be purchased, they can only be shared. In a world that measures healing by profit margins rather than human recovery, how much wisdom are we throwing away simply because it doesn't come with a price tag?